Good evening. This Shabbos, Parshas Vayakhel-Pekudei brings the conclusion of Sefer Shemos, and Sefer Shemos is really the backbone, the unifying factor of the idea of the home, the unity of Klal Yisrael based on their homes, and that's why the pasuk says levos, that every other chumash ends with a different ending, but the one for Shemos reflects the concept of the household. That's why it begins with Ve'el Shemos B'nei Yisrael Haboim Mitzrayim Ishu Veiso Ba'u, and that's how it ends in the last pasuk of Shemos, because the whole tafkid of people remembering their roots, their names, their lashon, their dress, to connect to the unity of Klal Yisrael, that helped them survive and save them in the totality of all the nisyonis that they had. Now, Vayakhel-Pekudei is a double center this week, and we stand up at the end and we call out Chazak Chazak V'nis Chazek. It's Shabbos Mevorachim HaChodesh of Chodesh Nisan, which the Shem Havaya for the month is Kesidron Yudke Vovke. It's in order, which is the highest level of Shefa Rav. Tremendous gifts and a flow of divine inspiration and gashmias and everything that a Yid needs. The most that the flow of the Chodesh comes down is Chodesh Nisan. That's how we were able to leave Mitzrayim. B'Nisan go'alu avosenu, nigalu avosenu, and asidin lihi go'el, that they will, it is the shoirish, and even though that it says that when the geula asida, that when the future redemption, which we are all waiting for, will happen, it'll be bigger miracles than Yetzias Mitzrayim. But the fact is that it will draw its strength from the roots of the original geula of Mitzrayim, and that is why, says the Ramban, that we have always a constant reference by Kiddush, by everything we do, that Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim, hanging on to the hook of the Amunah that fostered and propelled the actual Geula to happen, that we draw down that Amunah and that inspiration and that actual redemption from Mitzrayim. So it comes to a close in Parshas Vayechi. Now, it's also, we take out a second Sefer Torah for Parshas HaChodesh. We know that there were 4 Partios, Shkolim, Zachor, Parah, and now Chodesh, and each one corresponded to one of the 4 letters of the Shem Havaya, and the Siyam, the shlemus to the Shem Havaya, comes with Parshas HaChodesh. So it's a very heightened Shabbos and a very great Shabbos for Klal Yisrael, because the prospects of good and geula are at its apex, at its highest point that it could be in terms of it happening. Now, Vayakhel-Pekudei, basically there were 5 sedras. Truma Tetzava Kisisa Vayakhel-Pekudei is a conclusion, and it ties together the building and the materials and everything of the Mishkan, and it then says that they finished their avodah, Vayakhel kol avodas Ohel Moed and the Mishkan, and on the words Vayakhel means, and they finished. The Medrash says that Rabbi Vu, who was one of the greatest Amoraim, before he was Nifter, they showed him what was waiting for him in Shemayim, and he was shocked. So the Mefarshim on the Medrash itself cannot understand what was he shocked about. Rabbi Vu was one of the greatest Amoraim. He knew he wasn't a Rasha, and he knew he learned day and night his whole life. So what was the big shock? That they showed him great palaces, the Medrash says. In other words, great Olam Haba that was waiting. So they say that, and it's on the pasuk, the Medrash says, Vatischak liyom acharon, that when Vayakhel, since it was the finishing and the completion of the Mishkan, that Vayakhel had finished, so the pasuk in Mishlei, Vatischak, and the woman of valor, many say that Shlomo Melech said Eishes Chayil, which that's part of, to his mother. Some say it was to his wife, but more say it was to his mother, like a tribute to his mother. And it means Vatischak liyom achron, that at the end of all time there will be great laughter because of the enjoyment of the ruchnius waiting and Olam Haba and everything else for them. So the Medrash says that, and it's interesting that the Medrash brings it on this word Vayakhel, and they finished, that Rabbi Vu was surprised about something else. He knew he was a tzaddik. He knew that he would have Olam Haba. But there were many things in his life, communal activity, that he undertook, and many things came to flourish and fruition, and came for his tzibur, for his community and his city, to life. But there were many things he began and it did not. And when he saw what was waiting for him in Olam Haba, it was not only the things that he finished, but things that he began and he did not finish, that were also a bushel basket of reward waiting for him. So this puzzled him. In other words, things that he finished and that the people could enjoy and grow by, he understood that that was an effort that was worthy of praise, worthy of reward. But things that he never finished, so the Mefarshim on the Medrash explain that Rabbi Vu was taka surprised, but it was teaching him a lesson and a lesson l'doros, that we are a people of not just the bottom line. That means you could meet somebody and he could tell another that he had a tremendous business and they were doing $100 million a year, but unfortunately he had to go bankrupt and he was left with nothing. So by Goyim, today the guy's nothing in terms of business and everything, so they look at the bottom line. But not by Yidden. Because if that man throughout his life was feeding the poor and he was busy supporting a yeshiva, they look at him at the tremendous lifetime of achievement and what he did. Today he's down only in his gashmias, but if his life was full of ruchnias, we are a people who look at the lifetime, not the bottom line, the end. Because if his days and his hours were spent with worthiness, that's how we look at it. And that's really what this story from the Medrash telling us from Rabbi Vu. Yes, he didn't finish some of his projects, but he worked very diligently. and he worked sincerely, and he wanted to bring it, and for whatever the reasons that he couldn't bring them to completion, he still got the schar. And that is a tremendous lesson for us, because sometimes we embark on a challenge, and in the middle or whatever, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has his cheshbon, we don't finish it. We tried, we did, we ran out of money, whatever the problem was that it didn't finish, but there's still a tremendous schar, reward waiting for the individual. Now, if you remember, it was Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur who was really the architect or the manager or the general contractor, whatever term you want to call him. He was only bar mitzvah. And yet the pasuk says Hashem, and he was a young boy that never did any of these things. That how did he know how to be able, which was so detailed and so perfected to be able to fit around? It was his Ruach HaKodesh. He was being led by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he had the tremendous, as the pasuk says, Chochma Das, Tevuna, that everything was put in to him, that he was able to direct the traffic to a perfection. But the pasuk also says that there was Oholiav ben Achisamach lemate Don, that Oholiav was like, should we call him his assistant, his right-hand man? Bezalel was the main, but he was together with him doing everything. And the Mefarshim asked, why did you need, if everything was being done chutz l'derech hateva, a 13-year-old suddenly became a master builder and perfectionist, what do they need Oliyav for? So the Mefarshim say to teach Klal Yisrael that we are a unified people. And you know, it's like if someone's appointed chairman to undertake a very major task in his shul or his community, and they say, we're also, so-and-so is going to work with you as a co-chairman. So the person should, if he's a gentleman, welcome him, work together, appreciate it. But if a person's ego is too big, then what do I need him? I don't need him. I can do that. This is a perfect thing. So instead of Bezalel saying, what are you giving me Oliyav? He treated him and dealt with him and worked with him with respect and mutual dignity. And that was implanted into Klal Yisrael, that when we as a tzibur, you know, you can have 9 biggest tzaddikim in the world, but you can't say Kaddish. It's only 9. But you can have 10, 13-year-olds, and you could say Kaddish. So we are a people that need to hang on and hold on to the associations of others in Klal Yisrael to bring out the ultimate in Kedusha and Baruch Hu and Yehi Shmei Rabbah. You need the minyan. A person can't say, look, I have the money, I can move on an island, I don't need anybody, and I can be... It's not true. You're not living here to be on an island and to just watch the videos all day or whatever you think you're doing. You have to be at a minyan 3 times a day, or you're going to be accountable why you weren't. Especially today, there are people that live that they have to travel 40 miles to get to a minyan. But there are people who live in Brooklyn that there's 1,000 minyan, and what's their teretz? Why weren't they at a minyan? And it's a reality. It's not just some drasha. We have to realize that we were put on this world with a responsibility. Navateichel, yes, there's certain things we started, we tried, didn't work out. We can end up with the full schar from it, but there has to be sincerity and there has to be honesty. Why didn't it happen? Is it just a facade and a rationale? But really, in truth, you could have and you should have. Or there was a legitimate type of a problem that came up that they couldn't do it. Now, we know that the Mishkan had in it, in the middle of the logs, they had a Bria Chatichon, which was a pole, which miraculously went around, in other words, that the poles wouldn't fall down, so there was inside a board that went from one end to the other. When it got to the end, it says, as Chazal bring, it went and miraculously turned by itself and went in the middle so that there was like something holding that the boards couldn't fall. The Bria Chatichon. And they carried tremendous, it was 32 amas long, which means 64 feet basically, which was very, very long. Yet we don't find any praise given to the people who carried it. That means it was a big job of carrying it. The Bnei Kohas carried the Aron. There were two fire-like lights in the beginning, and if any snake or enemy or anything came, the fire shot out and killed it, the Medrash says. So there was, this was a miraculous building and traveling and everything that was going on. But yet there's no praise given to them. And we know that Avram Avinu worried about them because it says that he planted in Beersheba, Avram Avinu, which was 500 years before they left Mitzrayim. He was born exactly 500 years to the month of Yetzias Mitzrayim. He planted that they had the Atzei Shittim, that they had all the wood that they needed. He planted it. And when Yaakov Avinu went down to Mitzrayim, the Medrash says he took all that wood. He cut down those trees and he brought it with him to Mitzrayim because he knew that when Klal Yisrael would leave Mitzrayim, they're going to need to build a Mishkan, and they're going to need these boards, these planks, these pieces, chunks of big wood. So Avram Avinu worried about them, and Yaakov Avinu worried even more in terms of he didn't just plant, he had to schlep. They cut down, these are tremendous boards, and he brought it with him to Mitzrayim. Yet when they left Mitzrayim, they took it with them, but they were more worried about the money. That there was a promise, and it was a mitzvah. Hashem said, when you leave Mitzrayim, you're going to go out, v'achreichein yetzu berchush gadol. So the Mefarshim say that when Moshe Rabbeinu left Mitzrayim, he was running around to find Yosef HaTzadik. Told Serach Bas Osher told him by the Nile where his Aron was. But he was busy he wasn't busy amassing money. But when he broke the luchos and all those chips of sapphire were there, the Gemara says Hashem said, Psal lucha, you take all those chips, they're yours. And he became fabulously wealthy. Fabulously. But the pasuk says, Chacham lev yikach mitzvahs, and that's going on Moshe Rabbeinu, because while the people were busy amassing all of the money, he was busy looking for Yosef. I'd say he wasn't amassing the money, but he wasn't left out, because people who do the right thing and think they're losing an opportunity would say with money, but they're not. Hashem never remains a debtor. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that everyone was busy with the money and they were not doing an Aveira, but that was their priority. But by Moshe Rabbeinu, the promise to Yosef HaTzadik was his priority, and therefore he was busy looking for that to make sure, and that's why not only he didn't lose out in terms of money, but he gathered the schus that he is given tremendous praise for what he did. But the others, that their mind was so much into the Gashmias that there's no mention of the tremendous work and everything that they did to leave Mitzrayim. Now, we know that in Chodesh Nisan there is a mitzvah of Birchas Ilonos, that there's a mitzvah to make a bracha on a fruit tree. And there's a story once that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zichrono Livracha, came to a tree, a house, and he stopped, and he saw a fruit tree, and he made the bracha. So somebody passing by, properly with kavod, said to him, the Rav is making a bracha here. There's only al pi Kabbalah, there's a big Indian if you can make the bracha on a place that has two fruit trees. And here there's only one, and up the block there are two fruit trees together. So Rav Shlomo Zalman answered and said, I am aware that there are two fruit trees up the block. And indeed, I want very much, I usually do make the bracha there. So why am I doing it here in front of this house? Because if you look up, you will see in the window there's a lady there, and that lady is an almana, and she asks me many of her shilas that the family had. So she knows who I am. And I know because of a comment she once made that she has the schus that the Poisek Hador, that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is making the bracha on her tree, that gives the almana tremendous satisfaction. And why should I, and there is a choshev Indian to do to two trees, but it's even a more choshev Indian to make an almana happy. And that's, we could learn up that there's so many things that we could do that make elderly or the sick, or sometimes it's not money, and it's not even time, but it's just a gesture of thought, consideration that he considered. What should he do here or there? And the almana's happiness outweighed everything. And we can sometimes, with just stopping to think for a moment, choose something that can bring very strong happiness to a person. Now, I want to say to you that in Vayakhel there is a pasuk that says V'hanasiyah Heviu, and there's a yud missing. And Rashi, if you look into the pasuk, you will see that Rashi says that the Nesiim, when they were told about the gold and the silver, and I mentioned this to you in Truma, that they said, listen, let Klal Yisrael bring whatever they have to bring, and whatever is missing, we will bring, which is really administrator of a yeshiva's dream, because if a Gavir walked in and said, you collect tuition and collect whatever you can, and then just send me the bill for the balance of what you need, the administrator would be dancing from here to California. But it was not so with them. And the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that even though it was listed in terms of their value in Truma, Zohav, gold, was first, and then Kesef, silver, and then the Choshes, copper, but at the end was put the Avnei Shoyam and the Avnei Miluim, which were diamonds or sapphires. So it was worth even more than the gold. So why is it listed last? Because there was a lack of attitude. Who brought it? These Nesiim. The Nesiim, the princes, the presidents of each Shevet brought it. But since they said, at the end, when whatever you're missing, they should have wanted to immediately participate and jump in, not to have an attitude, whatever is left over. So therefore the Yud is missing. And the word, it's mentioned all over in Pekudei and in the Asher Naso Libo. What does that mean? That means just what we're speaking about. That their hearts jumped up. Excuse me. They couldn't wait to participate. And I once mentioned to you that there's somebody in our shul that walks around and gives out dollar bills to the people. But for tzedakah, when a man comes collecting, half the people give, and the other half of the people go like this. So he wants that they should have a schus for tzedakah. So he comes up to them and says, I'm not making you my shliach as if I'm giving you the dollar as a gift. So it's yours, now you give the ani, so you don't lose the schus hatzedakah. And let's not forget that it doesn't say by Shabbos that it's matzel mimaves, or that it's mevi geula, and it doesn't say it by kashrus or tefillin, but it does say it by tzedakah. So a person should never lose the opportunity of the tzedakah. So he goes around in the minyanim, must give out $200 shachris and 200 at myriad. But he feels bad for the people that are just, the train of opportunity is right in front of him and he goes like this, for the dollar. He goes and buys a Danish, or he goes and buys a newspaper, takes up the dollar or two. So the word naso libo, that what propelled this whole project of the Mishkan was the spirit of the women. Like in Kletsk, where Baron Kotler, Zichron Levracha, used to tell over that when they built in Kletsk the new building for the yeshiva, that the ladies, the old ladies, came and emptied out their purses of pennies. They were old, they were poor, and they had really nothing, but they gave their last penny. They emptied out their pocketbook and they poured all the pennies they had saved and collected and put it down to participate in the building of the Kletsky Yeshiva. So the idea of wanting to thrust forward, to run ahead, and to show the eagerness and the thirst of wanting to participate. And that goes for every activity in your shul. It goes for every activity in your tzibur. Now, it says that the difference here and the egel, by the egel, the men came to the women and wanted their jewelry, and every one of them refused to give. And it says by Yisparku that they, according to a medrash or the Yalkut, that the men in some cases forcibly took the jewelry from the women because they didn't want to give it. But over here, because the pasuk says in Vayakhel, Vayavo ha'anoshim al hanoshim, that the men came on the women. So Rashi already says al doesn't mean on, it means in, with the women. But the Medrash wants to point out that the men were only coming on the shoulders of the women, in enthusiasm. The women jumped forward and gave all of their jewelry for the Mishkan. They were thrilled to do it. And the enthusiasm of the men was there in most cases, but not at the level of the women. And it says that the women were zoicha because of the Mishkan to the Yom Tov of Rosh Chodesh. Now, Rosh Chodesh is a matana, and Shulchan Aruch says they don't sew. There are things that women do not do on Rosh Chodesh and men do, because they got the matana in a higher level of Rosh Chodesh. And the Shemoneh Tov asks, why is it that they got that? Why not, the women were so wonderful in their activity with the Mishkan? Why not add on 20 years of life to every woman? Why not give them bigger families? Why was the gift of Rosh Chodesh chosen over anything else? So if you take a look at the pasuk in this week's Seder that talks about the Kalim, so when it comes to the Kior and the Kano, the pitcher, they used to wash the Kohanim's hands and feet, so they used to take a pitcher and they poured the water into a Kano, a vessel like that could take the water. And those vessels, those Kanim, the vessels of recipient of the water, they were made out of the mirrors of the women. And the Medrash says that when the women brought their jewelry, many of them brought even their mirrors. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, mirrors? That's disgusting. You use mirrors to beautify yourself. You put on your makeup and then you look in the mirror to see. That's what you want to bring in the Mishkan? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Chavivin olai mikol hakelim. I love those mirrors more than anything else. Because when the men in Mitzrayim said, we don't want to have children, what are we going to have children for? That they should be thrown into the Nile? Thrown into the Nile? So the Medrash says that the women used to...
Just me.
That the women used to take their makeup and put it on. They put the makeup on, and they used to look into a mirror. That they used to look at the mirror to see if the makeup was good. And then they went down to the fields where the men were breaking their backs and sweating tears from all the terrible oppression and how they had to work under the worst of circumstances. And they aroused an appetite by the men for the women, and that's how Klal Yisrael continued, that the men continued having families because of those mirrors. So the Medrash says that Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, what brought a renewed attitude to the husbands? It was from those mirrors. And it's more b'chavivin alai, Hashem said. It's more beloved to me than anything else that everyone's bringing. And use them. Accept it and use them. So since the women brought an atmosphere of hischadshus, renewal, what is Rosh Chodesh? It's pitch black outside and then suddenly the moon appears. Hischadshus. Like a person in his life, he's down, there's this problem, there's that problem, and then suddenly there's a ray of hope. That's called hischadshus. That's Rosh Chodesh. That the moon suddenly, the light appears in the midst of all the darkness. For all the days that it's been pitch black in the sky, that suddenly there is a tremendous amount of his chadshus, and that there's a new month, there's new hope, there's a new beginning. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt it was befitting, Chazal say, that since Rosh Chodesh is his chadshus, and the women brought about his chadshus, a renewal of spirit by the man, that's why they were specifically given the gift of Rosh Chodesh. Now, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zichrono Livrocha, used to speak every year. He spoke on and delivered a drasha about Pekudei, that in the beginning of the parsha of Pekudei, it refers to two words, double. Vayakhel-Pekudei ha-Mishkan, Mishkan ha'oidus. So the word Mishkan is written twice in the pasuk, right next to each other. So Chazal say because the Mishkan was really only a temporary, even though it had more Shechina, it describes the first Bais Hamikdash and the second Bais Hamikdash more luxurious, and here was a little Mishkan, but the Hashros HaShechina was much more intense in the Mishkan than in either of the Bais Hamikdash, but it was still temporary, because as soon as Shlomo HaMelech, after the 479 years that the Mishkan stood, both in the Midbar and in Eretz Yisrael, as soon as Shlomo HaMelech completed Bayis Rishon, that was no more Mishkan. In other words, its purpose was completed. So, and we had two Batei Mikdash. And that's why the pasuk has, because the word Mishkan, the Rosh Yeshiva said, is the same letters as Mashkin. I mean, let's say a person is very tight on money, and for luxury, he's not going to take his lichter, his candelabra that his wife benches licht on, and go sell it. But he may take the candelabra and give it into a store that will lend against it, and that when he has the money a year later, he can come redeem his candelabra. He doesn't have to give it up. In the meantime, he can get some money, he can borrow against it. Collateral. So that's what the Rosh Yeshiva said. Elam, a reference to the two Batei Mikdash, Mishkan, but it was only a Mashkin. It was only something that was like collateralized, that the Shekhinah wanted badly to come down in a more intensive way, and it gave it a vehicle for Klal Yisrael to bring korbanos and to do what they had to do. But it was only a mashkin. We didn't give away the right to have the two Batei Mikdash. We were that was destined to be, and the third one will be forever, for eternity. So that's why in discussing the summation of the Mishkan, said the Rosh Yeshiva, that there was the concept of Mishkan ha'edus, that it was really just a temporary dwelling, and that their eyes were set on Binyan Bayis Rishon. Now it says that David HaMelech began the building, but anything that he built could never be destroyed. So after he built 6 rows for the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem told him to stop. And those 6 rows are still there. The archaeologists uncovered way down what's doing, and it's there. And his great-great-great-grandmother Rus gave the first stone. And the archaeologist can show you, if you go on one of these season tours with some tour guide who knows what he said, he can point and show you that at that row, that stone way down in the bottom, that first stone, that's the one that Rus gave for the Bais HaMikdash, and that's still there. But the Bais HaMikdash was destined to be destroyed. So therefore, David HaMelech had to be told to stop, and after he stopped, Shlomo, his son, subsequently, David HaMelech lived for 70 years, and 40 years he was Melech. And his son was also Melech for 40 years. He became king when he was 12, Shlomo HaMelech. And he built Bais Rishon, which he was not at the level of David, his father, and therefore that was able to be destroyed, which it was subsequently destroyed. Now, we know that the second Sefer Torah that's taken out, which will be read from Parshas HaChodesh, HaChodesh Hazel Lochem Rosh Chodoshim, and in Parshas Bo, where it is written, I said to you, the Vilna Gaon's Vart, but since it's Parshas HaChodesh, and that was like 8 weeks ago, I'm going to say it again. It's worthy of being repeated. That the Vilna Gaon said that we know that on Rosh Chodesh you are not allowed to fast. But the regular days of the month, you are allowed to fast. But there's one exception, Nisan. That Nisan's the exact opposite. On Rosh Chodesh, you are allowed to fast. On Rosh Chodesh. And the days of the month of Nisan, you are not allowed to fast. So again, the Rosh Chodoshim of each month, you're not allowed to fast. But the days of the month, you are allowed to fast. But Chodesh Nisan is the opposite. That the first day you could fast, Rosh Chodesh. But the days of the entire month, you're not allowed to fast. So So the Vilna Gaon touched the pasuk HaChodesh Hazel Lochem, the whole Chodesh of Nisan, Rosh Chodoshim, has the din of a Rosh Chodesh. That means all the days of Chodesh Nisan, you are not allowed to fast. It has a din of Rosh Chodesh of the other month. But Rishon Hu Lochem, but the first day of Chodesh Nisan is L'chol Chodshei Hashana, is like the days of all of the months of the year that you are allowed to fast. So I would like to express to each and every one of you that we are going into a very auspicious time, that if we wake up and say more Tillim and give some more tzedakah, it's mesugel. It's mesugel. That's why the Yud Kei Vav Kei is Kesidron goes in order, because it can bring out the biggest and the best. We know that there's such a thing as this Arusa de La'ela and this Arusa de Latata, and Chodesh Nisan is this Arusa de La'ela. It's even more than Chodesh Tishrei. If you don't take the Shofar and the Esrog and Lulav, you can't be Zoicha to all the levels of Shefa. You have to do yours. But by Pesach it says that even if someone doesn't do any of the mitzvahs, he's just under the shower of the Shefa of Chodesh Nisan, he's Zoicha tremendous things. Obviously, if someone does Lishma and does properly the mitzvahs halayla, of how much higher and greater and bigger the opportunities are. So we're going into great times, and we should seize the opportunity to be able to maximize the benefits for Klal Yisrael.